على ديني على أرض تلاقيني أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم أنا دمي فلسطيني 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 أنا دمي فلسطيني على أرض تلاقيني أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم والله أنا دمي فلسطيني 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 أنا دمي فلسطيني
Palestinian Corner from Montreal, le coin palestinien de Montréal, and this is our 16th episode, the weekly episode, and is devoted to a champion of peace and human rights in the whole world, and in particular the Middle East, the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, and his major opinions concerning the Palestinian. مرحبا وأهلا بكم في ركن فلسطين من مونتريال، وهذه هي حلقتنا السادسة عشر الأسبوعية، ونخصصها عن الرئيس الأمريكي 39 جيمي كارتر وموقفه من القضية الفلسطينية والمستوطنين الإسرائيليين وسرقتهم للأراضي الفلسطينية وتأييده المطلق لحقوقهم الإنسانية والاعتراف الدولي بدولتهم الفلسطينية. الرئيس جيمي كارتر غني عن التعريف، فلقد كان وراء اتفاقية السلام المصرية الإسرائيلية وانسحاب الجيش الإسرائيلي من سيناء وتجنب حرب وقصف إيران خلال اختطاف موظفي السفارة الأمريكية. الرئيس جيمي كارتر حاصل على جائزة نوبل للسلام، وهو أيضا من خلال مركزه الذي أنشأه مركز كارتر للسلام والحقوق الإنسانية له مشاريع في 80 دولة، فله 30 كتاب في الأمور السياسية طبعا والإنسانية، ومنها واحد عن فلسطين. تدخل شخصيا في قضيتنا الفلسطينية وشارك كمراقب وخبير في كل الانتخابات التي جرت في الساحة الفلسطينية، وترك أثره ورأيه على كل الرؤساء الأمريكان. الرئيس جيمي كارتر يضع ثقله السياسي وفكره وراء حقوق الشعب الفلسطيني لاسترداد حقوقه الإنسانية والاعتراف بدولته الفلسطينية، صاحب صوت ومنطق قوي مع العدل والحقوق الإنسانية، وينتقد سياسة بلده أمريكا كما ينتقد رئيس الوزراء الإسرائيلي بمنتهى الصراحة بنيامين نتنياهو بأسلوب دبلوماسي وسياسي راقي. إنه حقا تشامب للسلام والحقوق الإنسانية. الرئيس جيمي كارتر 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, on Palestine.
But there's no doubt that within the occupied territories, Palestinian land, that there is a horrendous example of apartheid. The occupation of Palestinian land, the confiscation of that land that doesn't belong to Israel, the building of settlements on it, the colonization of that land, and then the connection of those isolated but multiple settlements, more than 200 of them, with each other by highways, on which Palestinians can't travel, and quite often where Palestinians cannot even cross. So the persecution of the Palestinians now under the occupying territories is under the occupation forces is one of the worst examples of human rights deprivation that I know. What is being done to the Palestinians now is horrendous in their own territory by the occupying powers, which is Israel. They've taken away all the basic human rights of the Palestinians, as was done in South Africa against the blacks. And I make it very plain in this book that the apartheid is not based on racism, as it was in South Africa, but it's based on the desire of a minority of Israelis to acquire land that belongs to the Palestinians and to retain that land, and then to exclude the Palestinians from their own property and subjugate them so that they can't arouse and demonstrate their disapproval of being robbed of their own property. That's what's happening in the West Bank. And the people in this country, in America, never know about this. They never discuss this. There's no debate about it. There's no criticism of Israel in this country. And in Israel, there is an intense debate about the issues in this book. In this country, no. The basic cause of the conflict is a sustained occupation of other people's land by the Israelis. And this is a direct violation of United Nations resolutions. It's a direct violation of the International Quartet's roadmap. It's a direct violation of the commitments that leaders of Israel have made in the past at Camp David when I was president and in Oslo, promising that Israel would withdraw from occupied territories. They have failed to do so. In response to that, and I'm not excusing them, there have been acts of violence. As a matter of fact, though, Hamas, the number one accused persons of violence, have not committed an act of suicide bombing that caused an Israeli life now since August of 2004. And I hope that they won't do that anymore. Other participants of the Palestinian society, smaller ones, have committed some atrocities. But the loss of life in the entire occupied territories has been horrendous. When President Obama went to Cairo and said that a policy of my nation and my government is no more Israeli settlements in Palestine. And this sent a wave of hope and aspirations for the Palestinians finally to get some basic political and human rights. And of course, it was rejected in its totality by the Netanyahu regime. And then I was also encouraged this past May when President Obama repeated the policy that all his predecessors have had since Israel was a nation, since 1967 at least, that Israel should withdraw from the occupied territories except for the 1967 borders modified. And apparently he's abandoned that as well. Now, when he made his recent speech in the United Nations, there was no mention of 67 borders. And I think this...
So what do you think is happening?
I think it's the political pressures within our country from the supporters of Israel. And I'm a supporter of Israel. I might add to say my hope, my number one international dream and prayer has been to bring peace to Israel. I was involved in the so-called Geneva Accords. In fact, I was involved in the negotiations between the Palestinians and Israelis. And I made the keynote speech at Geneva when it was announced. And it called for leaving half of the Israelis settlers in Palestine in exchange for some property of Israel that would go to the Palestinians to modify the borders. And when I was speaking on the last time, I had a long discussion with Ariel Sharon, very conservative prime minister, as you know. Sharon had accepted that premise. In fact, he pointed out to me a very intriguing idea. He said, why don't Israel give to the Palestinians a land corridor between Gaza and the West Bank, which is about 36 miles, and let them build on that corridor a railroad and a highway. It'll be owned by the Palestinians as a land swap, and the Israelis will maintain security. And when the Israelis want to go from one part of the Negev desert to another, they would just go under a tunnel or over a bridge and let the Palestinians have that land. So all of the predecessors of Netanyahu have accepted the premise that Israel must give up the occupied territories in order to have peace. This is what everybody knows as a two-state solution. Netanyahu and Lieberman and others are now moving inevitably, apparently to me, to a one-state solution, where there's only going to be one nation between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, controlled ostensibly by the Jews, the Israelis. But this can't last.
A state about which you dared to conjure the word apartheid.
That's the prospect. Yeah, that's what's going to happen. So you're either going to have, right now there are a majority of non-Jews in that one state, but they're not a majority of non-Jewish voters yet because the Palestinians are younger in age. But it's just a few years before there'll be a majority of non-Jews in that one state area. And Israel will be faced with an impossible choice. Either have part of their citizens deprived of a right of citizenship, that is the non-Jews, or to let the Arabs outvote the Jews in their own country. So you can see this is inevitably moving toward a tragedy, in my opinion, for Israel. But apparently that's what Netanyahu is trying to do. All of the Arab countries, as you know, have made the so-called Arab peace proposal to recognize Israel diplomatically and an equal trading partner if Israel will just do what I just said, withdraw basically to the 67 borders. And Hamas leadership have announced publicly and told me privately that they will accept Israel's existence within the 67 borders modified by negotiation. They've also said that they would anoint Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the PLO, to be their representative negotiator. And they will accept any deal negotiated by Abbas with Israel, provided the Palestinians have a right to vote on it in a referendum and approve the results of the negotiation. So I think there's adequate flexibility on the Arab side, and in the past there has been flexibility on the Israeli side. Now apparently that flexibility is gone.
يلا سمونا